Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we journey into a world of clay, fire, and faith. In the heart of what we now call Nigeria, long before the first whisper of iron echoed through its valleys, a civilization shaped the very earth into a form of eternity. They were the knockmasters of terracotta, guardians of an ancient artistry. They walked these ochre plains, where their hands coaxed life from mud and their spirits seemed to converse with the flames. Their art survives, a testament to their genius, yet their individual voices have long since faded into the mists of time. The Nok left behind statues that almost seemed to breathe, their hollow eyes gazing through millennia as if still searching for the hands that made them. And if you listen closely, the wind that brushes across the Kaduna hills still carries the faint, earthy scent of burnt clather, perfume of forgotten labor and incredible devotion. The story you are about to hear is not just about art. It is about sacrifice. It's about those who worked until the earth itself seemed to bleed red, whose fingers cracked and blistered under the relentless sun, and whose profound devotion gave birth to a beauty that simply refused to die. So let's pause here for a moment. Imagine the fire crackling softly as we rest beneath a canopy of stars, ready to travel back in time. The Nok people thrived between roughly 1500 BCE and 500 CE, a period so distant that even history whispers uncertainly about their daily lives. Yet, through their terracotta, they speak to us across the ages. We see warriors poised with spears, women adorned with intricate hairstyles, and figures that could be kings or priests, draped in sacred regalia. Each sculpture is a fragment of their vanished world, a powerful echo from a civilization that once pulsed with vibrant rhythm and deep-seated ritual. To the Nok, the earth was not just a resource, it was alive. Digging for clay was an act of communion, not of commerce. Each clay pit was approached with reverence, like a shrine, and each kiln was tended with the care you'd give a living heart. Within this world of sacred soil, the sculptors labored. They endured burns from the kilns, blisters from their tools, and the sheer exhaustion of their craft. They did this because, for them, to shape clay was to shape destiny itself. It was a way to connect with their ancestors, their gods, and the very soul of their community. The creation of each piece was a ritual. It began with a prayer to the earth, asking permission to take its clay. The material was then carefully kneaded, mixed with gravel or quartz to prevent it from cracking in the fire. This wasn't just a technical step. It was an act of strengthening, of infusing the clay with resilience. Then came the sculpting. Hands, guided by generations of knowledge, would form the distinctive features of Nok art, the triangular eyes, the parted lips, the elaborate coiffures. Each detail was a symbol, a story, a piece of a much larger cultural puzzle that we are still trying to solve today. But the true trial was the firing. The sculptures were placed in open pits, covered with wood, and set ablaze. The artists had to control the temperature with incredible skill, using only the wind and the type of wood as their guides. Too hot, and the figures would shatter. Too cool, and they would crumble. For hours, they would watch the flames, feeding the fire, their faces lit by the glow. Their minds focused on one single outcome, transformation. It was in this crucible of fire that simple mud was reborn as timeless art. Imagine the moment the kiln cooled. The community would gather as the sculptors carefully unearthed their creations from the ashes. It was a moment of judgment, of hope. Would the spirits of the clay and fire be kind when a perfectly formed statue emerged? Intact and glowing with a warm, reddish hue, it wasn't just a successful firing. It was a blessing. These figures weren't mere decorations. Archaeologists believe they were used in ancestral veneration. in healing rituals, or as grave markers, connecting the world of the living to the realm of the spirits. They were anchors of faith, made tangible through soil and flame. So, tonight, as we sit here under the baobab, we travel back into that red dust and ancestral silence. We will listen for the heartbeat of the kill, for the echoes of craftsmen who may have sung through their pain, and for the spirits they believed guarded the clay. This is a story of how human creativity, when fueled by deep belief, can transcend even the passage of millennia. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found yourself captivated by the story of the Nok, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Under Baobab Skies for more stories from the heart of our shared history. Your support allows us to keep these incredible stories alive. Until next time, may your skies be as vast and full of wonder as ours. You are now under Baobab Skies, and the story begins now. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Settle in, get comfortable. Tonight, we're journeying back in time, not just by centuries, but by millennia. We're going to a place where art wasn't a luxury, but a matter of life and death. By the end of our time together, you'll understand what it truly meant to live and die by the clay. The Nok sculptor did not simply mold the earth, he wrestled with it. Every single morning began not with a gentle awakening, but with a pilgrimage. A long walk into the hills, where a treasure of red clay waited, hidden just beneath a thin skin of soil. Imagine this. Men and women, their muscles already aching from yesterday's labor, digging with simple wooden spades. Their bare hands scoop up the mud, which shimmers in the early light with particles of iron dust. The air itself is a character in this story. It hangs thick, heavy with the scent of rust and sweat. The clay, slick and demanding, clings to their ankles like hungry spirits from another world. In the shadows of the gullies, mosquitoes hum a constant, irritating tune. Every single shovel of earth is a test of endurance. Each heavy lump of clay carried back is both a promise of creation and a forewarning of pain. To the Nok, this wasn't just dirt. This clay was sacred. They had a name for it, the blood of the earth. It was a profound belief that within this reddish soil lived an ancestral essence, the very same spirit that animated human beings. So, to take clay from the ground was to borrow life itself. And when you borrow something so precious, you must give something back. This is why sculptors would often perform a ritual before their first harvest of the season. They would bleed into the soil, a small cut, a personal gift to appease the spirit of the ground they were about to disturb. It was a contract, a pact of respect between the artist and the earth. When they finally returned to their village, their backs straining under the weight of baskets full of damp clay, the work was far from over. The first step was a purification. The sculptors would wash their hands not just in water, but in a mixture of herbs and smoke, cleansing themselves for the sacred task ahead. Then came the kneading. They would tip the clay onto a hard-packed floor and begin to work it with their feet. It was a slow, rhythmic motion that looked less like labor and more like a dance. Each step was measured, deliberate, almost musical, as if they were moving to the beat of unseen drums, a rhythm passed down through generations. This process was an exercise in extreme patience, and it could take hours. The consistency had to be perfect. If the clay was to dry, it would crack and crumble later on. If it was too wet, the form would sag and collapse under its own weight. The sculptor had to learn a deep, abiding patience. Patience not born of a leisurely life, but of absolute necessity. In the world of Nok pottery, to rush was to destroy everything. A moment of impatience could undo days of back-breaking work. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine us sitting together, the the fire crackling softly as we rest beneath a canopy of stars, listening to this ancient story. There was a belief, a deep-seated fear, that the earth punished arrogance. If a sculptor took too much clay, grew greedy, or failed to perform the proper offering before digging, his skill would betray him. The very fire that was meant to give his creations permanence would turn against him, bursting mid-firing and shattering weeks of meticulous work into useless shards and dust. And so, the Nock sculptors developed an intimate, personal relationship with their material. They would whisper to their clay, speaking to it, pleading for mercy and cooperation as they shaped it into faces, limbs, and the silent, expressive figures we now marvel at. They weren't just making objects. They were coaxing life into form. Their tools were as humble as their process. They used simple, sharpened sticks for fine details, smooth stones for polishing surfaces, and supple strips of leather to smooth and shape the curves. Yet, in their skilled hands, these mundane objects became instruments of divine translation. Every groove carved into the terracotta was like a verse of a poem. Every finished statue, a prayer made solid. It was a language without words, a conversation with the ancestors, with the spirits, and with the earth itself. Think about the scene. A sculptor, sweat beading on their brow, working by the flickering light of a fire. You see the close-up of their hands, stained and strong, as a face slowly emerges from a lump of red clay. The firelight catches the texture of the clay, making it seem alive, breathing. It was brutal, exhausting work, but it was also holy work. And for the Nock sculptor, those two things, the brutal and the holy, could never be separated. They were two sides of the same sacred coin. Now, as we move from the raw material to the artist's touch, let's explore the forms these figures took. The Nock didn't just create human figures, they created a whole universe of beings. There were animals, of course serpents, elephants, monkeys, each rendered with a stylized but recognizable energy. But the most captivating, the most famous, are the human heads. These heads are remarkable for their triangular or semicircular eyes, their parted lips, and their incredibly elaborate hairstyles and beaded adornments. Each hairstyle wasn't just a decorative choice. It was a marker of identity, of social status, of lineage, or perhaps even a spiritual role within the community. Buns, tresses, incised patterns, these were as important as the expression on the face. The parted lips are another mystery. Are they speaking, chanting? Are they in a state of trance, receiving a message from the spirit world? Or are they simply breathing, captured in a moment of serene life? Scholars have debated this for decades, and the truth is, we may never know for sure. That ambiguity is part of their power. They are frozen in a moment of expression that invites us to imagine the world they came from. And these weren't small, hand-held trinkets. Some of these terracotta heads were near life-sized. Imagine the skill required to build, dry, and fire a hollow clay sculpture of that size without it cracking or exploding in the kiln. It required a mastery of engineering as much as artistry. They had to know exactly how thick the walls needed to be, how to manage the drying process to prevent stress, and how to control the temperature of the fire with nothing but wood and intuition. The purpose of these sculptures is another great enigma. Were they grave markers honoring the dead? Were they icons placed on altars, used to focus prayer and ritual? Or were they portraits of rulers, priests, or revered ancestors meant to preserve their memory and power? Some theories suggest they were part of complex rituals related to agriculture, healing, or justice. For example, a figure might have been created to resolve a dispute, its presence acting as a silent, ancestral witness that compelled honesty. Or perhaps they were used in healing ceremonies, their forms believed to channel spiritual energy to cure the sick. The sheer number of fragments found scattered across a wide area of what is now Nigeria suggests they were a central part of Nok life. They weren't rare artifacts hidden away in a king's tomb. They seem to have been used, handled, and perhaps even intentionally broken during rituals. The damage we see on many of them might not be accidental, but a part of their life cycle, a ritual killing of the object once its purpose was served. This brings us back to the inseparable bond between the Noke people and their art. For them, creating a sculpture wasn't an act of self-expression in the modern sense. It was a community act, a spiritual necessity. The artist was a channel, a conduit through which the needs of the community and the will of the spirits could be given physical form. The sweat, the pain, the fear of the kill, the patient dance with the clay, all of it was an offering. The final sculpture was not the end product, but a waypoint in a continuous cycle of life, spirit, and earth. As we stand in awe of these terracotta masterpieces in museums today, it's easy to forget the journey they took. The journey from the red earth of the Nigerian hills, through the hands of a sculptor whispering pleas to the clay, through the terrifying crucible of the fire, and finally through 2,500 years of silence, waiting to be rediscovered. They are not just objects of beauty, they are survivors. They are the last remaining storytellers of a culture that has long since vanished, leaving behind these powerful, silent faces to speak for them. They remind us that art can be more than decoration. It can be the very blood of the earth, the essence of a people's soul. Once the clay figures were shaped, their forms holding the quiet breath of their creator, they were not yet complete. They were taken to shaded huts, away from the harsh sun, to begin a long, patient wait. For days, sometimes even weeks, they sat in the cool dark, the moisture slowly leaving their bodies, hardening their clay skin. This was a time of stillness, a liminal space between wet earth and hardened art. But the true test, the trial that would decide their fate, was yet to come. That test was fire. Imagine the scene. The sculptor, his hands caked with the same earth he was about to transform, builds his kiln. This isn't just a simple oven. He uses the architecture of nature itself, termite mounds, reinforced with thick clay walls. The kiln's opening, its mouth, is often shaped like a great beast, poised as if ready to swallow the world whole. It's a powerful, almost primal image. When the time was right, when the wood was stacked and the figures carefully placed inside, the fire would be lit. And as the flames roared to life, casting dancing shadows across the village, everyone knew another soul was being tested in the belly of the beast. The heat was merciless, an elemental force that demanded respect and caution. Standing too close to the kill's mouth meant blistered skin, the fire's breath searing and unforgiving. But stepping back too far was just as dangerous. If the fire died down, if the temperature dropped even slightly at the wrong moment, the delicate figures inside could crack, their forms shattering. The work would be a failure. Every firing was a precarious dance, a delicate balance between danger and devotion. The sculptor had to read the fire, understand its hunger, its rhythms. He was not just a craftsman. He was a fire tamer, a partner in a volatile creation. And when the flames grew too wild, when their roar became too aggressive, the sculptors had their rituals. They would offer libations, pouring palm oil or millet beer onto the ground near the kiln, a gesture of peace to calm the fiery spirit within. To an outsider, this might look like a simple, albeit intense, manufacturing process. Just clay, wood, and fire. But for the Noke people, the kiln was something far more profound. It was a living altar, a sacred space where the physical and spiritual worlds converged. It devoured offerings, the wood, the libations, the sculptor's sweat and prayers, and, in return, it birthed a legacy. It was a crucible of transformation. When a sculpture survived the night, emerging from the cooled ashes whole and unblemished, it was seen as a sign. The spirits had accepted the offering. The form was deemed worthy. But when a figure cracked, or, worse, exploded in the intense heat, the sculptor wept. The tears were not just for the loss of hours, days of painstaking labor. They were for the message the shattered clay carried. The ancestors were displeased. The failure was a spiritual one. Each fire had its own voice. Some were silent, a low, steady burn that whispered through the night. Others roared like thunder, the sound echoing through the valley. The village elders, wise in the ways of the elements, claimed that the sound of the fire revealed the mood of the spirits. A deep, resonant hum was a sign of approval, a peaceful acceptance. But sharp, cracking pops were a warning, a sign of agitation or discontent. And so the sculptors listened, their eyes red and stinging from the smoke, their hands raw from feeding the flames, and their hearts trembling with a profound faith. They weren't just watching a kill. They were in communion with the forces that governed their world. The morning after the firing was a sacred time. A hush would fall over the area around the kill as the sculptor and his assistants waited for the heat to subside. It was a moment of supreme anticipation, of hope and fear mixed in equal measure. Once it was safe, each surviving sculpture was carefully removed from the cooled chamber. Still warm, it was cleansed with cool river water, the steam rising in a final, quiet exhalation. Then it was gently wrapped in soft cloth, like a newborn child. But it was still not finished. The figure, now hardened and transformed by fire, was carried to a priest or a spiritual elder. This was the final, crucial step. The awakening. The priest would hold the figure, breathing words of power into its hollow eyes, invoking the spirits to inhabit the form. He might trace sacred patterns of iron dust or ochre on its forehead, marking it as a vessel. Only then, after this ritual of consecration, did a simple piece of fired clay become an ancestor, a conduit to the other world. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine us sitting here, the fire crackling softly, the vast, starry sky above. The story of the Noack is a testament to a world where there were no shortcuts. There was no easy path to creation. Every single piece came with a cost. A measure of pain, both physical, from the burns and the smoke, and spiritual, from the anxiety and the weight of ancestral judgment. To fail was not just possible, it was common. Many figures were lost to the fire, but to persist, to face that fire again and again, to keep shaping the clay, despite the risk of heartbreak, that was considered divine. It was an act of supreme faith and resilience. And so, for generation after generation, the sculptors of the Noack civilization worked. They spent their lives with their hands in the earth, their faces lit by the glow of the kiln. They worked until their very skin seemed to take on the color of the clay they loved so deeply. In this tireless, cyclical process of creation, their blood and the earth truly became one. They weren't just making objects. They were embedding their own life force, their lineage, and their beliefs into the very soil they walked upon, ensuring their ancestors would have a voice for centuries to come. This commitment is almost unimaginable today. We live in a world of instant gratification, of digital copies and 3D printers. But for the Noack, every object was singular, precious, and earned through a trial by fire. Think about the focus required, the deep, intuitive knowledge of materials. The sculptor had to understand the clay's memory, how it would shrink and shift in the heat. They had to know the wood, which types would burn hot and fast, which would offer a slow, steady glow. This wasn't science as we know it. It was a holistic, inherited wisdom passed down through observation and practice. Each successful sculpture, therefore, was a library of knowledge. It held the story of its own creation, the specific clay bed it came from, the weather on the day it was shaped, the particular character of the fire that gave it permanence. When we look at a knockhead today in a museum, we're not just seeing a stylized face. We're seeing the culmination of this entire epic process. We're seeing the ghost of the fire, the faith of the sculptor, and the breath of the priest. The intricate hairstyles, the expressive eyes, the detailed jewelry, all of it had to survive that inferno. The fact that they did is nothing short of a miracle. This also adds another layer to their meaning. If a figure represented a revered elder or a powerful leader, its survival of the kill was a posthumous affirmation of their life and status. It was as if the spirits themselves were endorsing that individual's legacy. A cracked figure, on the other hand, might prompt a period of introspection for the community. What had they done to cause displeasure? What balance needed to be restored? The art was a barometer for the spiritual health of the entire village. It was a constant dialogue between the living and the dead, mediated by clay and fire. The sheer physical toll is also worth considering. This was not a gentle art form. The sculptors would have been strong, hardy individuals, their bodies marked by their profession. Scars from stray embers, lungs toughened by smoke, hands calloused and shaped by the clay. They lived their art. It wasn't a job they clocked in and out of. It was their identity, their calling, their sacred duty. Their legacy wasn't just in the figures they left behind, but in the lineage of skill they passed on to their apprentices, ensuring the fire would not go out. This tradition, this fusion of art, faith, and sheer grit is what allowed the knocker culture to produce such a staggering body of work, creating the earliest large-scale sculptures in sub-Saharan Africa and leaving a permanent mark on the story of humanity. Welcome back. As we settled around the fire last time, we spoke of the Noke, a people whose world was shaped by iron and clay. We saw how they tamed the earth, forging tools that brought forth abundance. But their most profound legacy wasn't forged in the heat of the furnace. It was molded by hand, born from the very soil they walked upon. Tonight, we delve deeper into the sacred world of the Nok sculptor, a world where clay was not just material, but spirit. Not just anyone in the Nok civilization could touch the clay. The right to sculpt was a sacred inheritance, a secret language passed down through generations, guarded fiercely within select lineages of artisans. It was a calling, not a choice. A young apprentice's journey didn't begin with a lump of clay in his hands. No, it began with humility. His first tasks were to carry water from the river, his shoulders aching under the weight of the gourds. Or to tend the fire, learning its moods, its hunger for wood, and its power to transform. For years, this was his life. He was a servant to the process, learning reverence before he learned technique. Only after this long initiation, after his hands had become calloused and his spirit patient, would he be permitted to mold his first pieces. These were small things, a simple amulet, a tiny animal figure. They were tests, not of artistic flair, but of his readiness, his skill, and, most importantly, his respect for the clay and the spirits it held. The creation of a major sculpture was not an act of craft. It was a profound spiritual ritual. Before the first touch, a ceremony was held to align the sculptor with the unseen world. The artist would enter a period of purification. He would fast, denying his body to sharpen his spirit. He would abstain from all speech, allowing silence to clear his mind of worldly chatter and open it to the whispers of the ancestors. He would sleep beside the kiln, its residual warmth a constant reminder of the transformative power he was about to wield. While he prepared in solitude, the women of the village would gather at a distance. Their voices would rise in the darkness, weaving songs of protection and blessing into the cool night air, creating a sonic shield around the sacred space. As the first light of dawn broke, painting the sky in soft hues, the master sculptor would walk to the riverbank. He would kneel, washing his hands not just with water, but with water mixed with millet flour, symbolic act of purification, cleansing him of any impurities before he undertook his holy work. Only then, with a clear mind, a pure body, and a protected soul, would he begin to shape the clay. Imagine him there, at the river's edge, as the dawn mist curls around him. He kneels, the soft light catching the contours of his face. He dips his hands into a clay bowl, the mixture of river water and millet flour feeling cool and grainy against his skin. In the background, the soft, ethereal singing of the women carries on the breeze. He closes his eyes, murmuring a silent prayer, and then, with a deep breath, he reaches for the prepared earth. His hands, now consecrated, are ready to begin their dialogue with the divine. Every piece he shaped from that moment on was a vessel of meaning. These were not mere decorations to adorn a home. They were spiritual conduits, complex symbols given physical form. The wide, almost hypnotic eyes you see on Noak terracottas. They represented wisdom, the ability to see beyond the physical world into the realm of spirits. The distinctively flared nostrils weren't just an artistic quirk. They signified vigilance, a readiness to sense danger or spiritual presence. And the characteristically open mouths. They symbolized the vital act of communication, a channel for prayers to travel to the ancestors, and for the ancestors' wisdom to flow back to the living. Each sculpture was a statement, a tangible representation of a spiritual state, of watchfulness, of insight, of communion. The Noke sculptor was a figure who lived in a liminal space, with one foot in the world of the living and the other in the invisible realm of spirits and ancestors. His art was the bridge that connected these two worlds. It was his sacred duty to translate what could not be spoken, what could only be felt or intuited, into the permanence of fired clay. This was a life of immense pressure and devotion. He was a channel, a medium through which the spiritual world could manifest in the physical. This role brought him both torment and peace. The torment of responsibility, of striving for a perfection that could honor the spirits, and the peace that came from fulfilling his sacred purpose, from being a conduit for something far greater than himself. His entire existence was a balancing act on the knife edge between the seen and the unseen, and this dedication lasted a lifetime. When a master sculptor's long life came to its end, his journey with clay was not over. His most precious tools, the smooth stones for polishing, the wooden spatulas for shaping, the sharp reeds for incising details, were not passed on. They were buried with him. The belief was that the clay, a living substance, would recognize its maker even in the afterlife. Thus, the artist's work continued beyond the grave. Even in death, he was still a sculptor, now shaping not just clay, but eternity itself. Let's just pause here for a moment. Let the fire crackle and imagine the vast, star-dusted African sky above us. The story of these ancient artists, their discipline, their faith, it's a powerful reminder. It reminds us that true, enduring art is not always born from comfort and ease. It doesn't blossom in studios filled with perfect light and every convenience. Sometimes, the most profound art is forged in sweat, in silence, and in sacrifice. The Nock sculptors worked until their hands were raw, until the earth itself seemed to bleed into their creations. They gave everything they had to their craft, and in doing so, they left a mark on this world, a spiritual heartbeat that still thrums just beneath our feet, waiting to be heard. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that art can be a form of prayer. Think about that. Every line etched, every curve smoothed, was an act of devotion. For us today, in our fast-paced, often disconnected world, this concept feels almost alien. We see art as self-expression, as commentary, as a commodity. But for the Knock, it was a conversation with the cosmos. It makes you wonder, what have we lost in our modern approach? Have we traded reverence for relevance? Have we silenced the spiritual whispers in our pursuit of a louder, more personal voice? The Knock didn't create for galleries or for critics. They created as a vital function of their society's spiritual health. Their sculptures were the anchors that kept their community tethered to their beliefs, their ancestors, and their gods. Each piece was a prayer made solid, a belief you could hold in your hands. This level of dedication is humbling. Imagine the focus required, the years of menial labor just to earn the right to touch the clay. It's a powerful lesson in patience and the importance of process. In our world of instant gratification, where we want to be masters of a skill overnight, the Knock sculptor's path is a stark contrast. It teaches us that mastery isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a journey you undertake. One step, one bucket of water, one small amulet at a time. The process itself was the transformation. The sculptor wasn't just shaping clay. The clay and the discipline were shaping him. This synergy between creator and creation is at the very heart of their story. The artist gave his life to the clay, and in return, the clay gave him immortality. As we look at the surviving fragments of their work, those haunting, beautiful terracotta heads, we are not just looking at ancient artifacts. We are looking at the physical residue of immense faith and discipline. We are seeing the culmination of fasting, of prayer, of songs woven into the night. We are seeing the bridge between two worlds, built by human hands. These sculptures survived millennia not just because they were well fired, but because they were infused with a power, a purpose that transcends time. They are a silent, eternal sermon in clay, speaking of a world where art and spirit were one. And as we continue our journey, we'll see how this spiritual foundation influenced every other aspect of their lives, from the iron in their furnaces to the seeds in their fields. It must have felt like a season that refused to end, a drought that stretched on for far too long, a famine that spread its tendrils far too wide. The people of the Noack civilization had been masters of the soil and the spirit, their hands shaping both the earth and their connection to the divine. But even true mastery must eventually bend before the relentless hunger of nature. The winds shifted their ancient patterns. The rains that had once been a promise of life became a betrayal, and the land itself began to transform. What had been a lush, vibrant forest belt teeming with life started to harden, its green heart turning to the golden brown of grassland. Water, once abundant, grew shy. The rivers, which had roared with the power of life, thinned into mere whispers trickling between sun-cracked stones. No one can say for certain whether this decline happened slowly, a creeping death marked by one failed harvest at a time, or if it was a sudden, violent cascade of ruin that shattered their world in an instant. But the signs of this decay were everywhere, written in the very earth beneath their feet. The clay, the lifeblood of their art and culture, grew stubborn and unyielding. The sculptors, men and women, whose entire existence was tied to the pliancy of the earth, found it turning against them. The clay they needed to mold into the forms of their gods and their ancestors was now brittle and dry. Their fingers, once so confident and sure, now crumbled the soil before it could ever take shape. It was as if the world itself was actively resisting their touch, turning their sacred art into dust. And yet, in the face of this creeping despair, they tried to persist. They fought to hold on. We can imagine, in some hidden corner of the Joes Plateau, a few families desperately clinging to the old rituals. Mothers whispering to their sons the ancient words, "Do not let the fire die." As long as the fire burns, the ancestors breathe. Their entire spiritual world was tied to that flame, that heat, that transformative power. But even the fire, the heart of their civilization, began to fade. The wood they needed to fuel their kilns, the furnaces that turned soft clay into eternal terracotta, became terrifyingly scarce. The forests that had once seemed endless were now shrinking. Trees were felled faster than they could possibly grow. Entire hillsides were stripped bare, not just for the kilns, but for the even more demanding process of iron smelting, a technology they had pioneered. The air, which for centuries had shimmered with the smoke of creation, the haze of art and industry, slowly went clear and still. And with that unnatural stillness, something alien crept into the Noack world. A concept they had never truly known before. The act of forgetting. It started with the small things, the little cracks in the foundation of their culture. A festival was skipped, its vibrant music unheard for the first time in generations. A sacred dance was postponed, its steps half remembered. A mask, intended to channel a powerful spirit, was left unfinished, its features frozen in a state of incompletion. The sculptors' songs, the rhythmic chants that once echoed through the valleys as they worked, fell silent one by one. The air grew heavy with their absence. Children, who had once played in the rich red dust with small clay figurines, mimicking their parents' craft, now began to look upon their elders' art as something strange, perhaps even frightening. The old ways were not just disappearing, they were becoming alien to the new generation. They were fading into myth, and tragically, the people did not seem to notice until it was far, far too late. The reasons for their disappearance have been debated for years. Some historians and archaeologists say the Noke vanished because of war. They propose that invaders from the north or the west, drawn by Gigit's riches and their knowledge of iron, swept through their lands. These invaders, the theory goes, took their tools, their art, and their stories, leaving a void where a great culture once stood. Others suggest a quieter, more insidious enemy, disease. They theorize that a plague crept silently through the settlements, a sickness that respected no social standing, silencing entire lineages overnight. A single outbreak could have been enough to sever the chains of knowledge passed down from master to apprentice, from parent to child, leaving the survivors adrift and disconnected from their own heritage. But perhaps, deeper than the visible wounds of conquest or plague, something more invisible was at play, a profound and total exhaustion. Think about it. Centuries of intense art production, centuries of mining and smelting, had drained the very soul of the land. The Noke had lived from the soil, they had sculpted it, they had smelted it, they had worshipped it, and they did so with such intensity that, in the end, it had nothing left to give. The land was spent, and so were its people. And yet, beneath this story of loss and decline, there was an incredible act of devotion. Even as the last sculptors watched their furnaces go dark for the final time, they did not abandon their creations. They buried their figures, their gods and ancestors, with immense care. They hid them near the sheltering roots of ancient trees. They tucked them beneath riverbanks, and they placed them inside the collapsed walls of their own huts. As they laid these figures to rest, they whispered over them a final prayer, a final hope: sleep until we return. They believed Or perhaps they simply needed to believe that this silence was not a true end, but merely an interlude, a pause in their great story. But history, as we know, does not always honor faith. The world does not always wait for our return. Generations passed, the memory of the Nok faded from the living world. The world moved on. New peoples walked the land. New songs were sung. The Nok became ghosts without graves, a civilization remembered only in the unique texture of the now forgotten soil, in the scattered broken fragments of clay that would one day astonish archaeologists who could not decipher their names or understand the depth of their silence. By the end of this period, night has fully fallen over their valley. The sky is dark. A place that once pulsed with the rhythm of the hammer, the heat of the kilt, and the sound of song, now lies perfectly, still bathed only in the light of a moon too pale and too distant to remember them. Centuries passed, the world forgot, but the land remembered. As the Harmattan winds swept across the Nigerian savannah, they carried away particles of time, grain by grain, revealing secrets that had been buried for millennia. Then, one day, a farmer's hoe struck something hard. It wasn't a rock digging in the earth near what we now call Noak village. People began to find strange faces staring back at them. They were completely unaware of the ancient civilization sleeping just beneath their feet. These faces, crafted from terracotta, had piercing, hollow eyes. Their lips were curled in a silent, eternal command, and their hair was styled in elaborate patterns that looked like crowns of fire. After more than 2,000 years of silence, the world that had disappeared was speaking again, not in words, but in fired clay and dust. What followed was not a moment of great archaeological breakthrough, but one of deep confusion and even fear. To the villagers who found them, these weren't historical artifacts. They were omens, perhaps spirits from the underworld. Some were terrified of them and quickly reburied them, hoping to appease whatever spirits they had disturbed. Others, seeing them as curiosities, quietly sold them to travelers for a few coins, never realizing they were parting with priceless pieces of their own history. The first whispers of the Noak civilization weren't in academic journals, but in quiet, furtive transactions along dusty roads. It wasn't until the 20th century that the wider world would finally learn the name Noak, a name given to this lost culture after the village where those first fragmented messengers were unearthed. But this recognition didn't solve the puzzle. It only made the mystery deeper. Who were these master artists, capable of such expressive and sophisticated sculptures? Why did their civilization, which seemed to burn so brightly with creativity and innovation, suddenly vanish from the historical record? And the most practical question of all, how had these fragile terracotta figures survived for 2,500 years buried in the acidic African soil? Some scientists point to a familiar culprit, climate change. They theorize that the slow, creeping desiccation of the West African forest belt, which occurred roughly between 500 BCE and 200 CE, was the beginning of the end. As the reliable rainfall patterns shifted and the land grew drier, the Nok people would have lost the fertile farmlands that sustained their population. The very forests that provided wood for their iron-smelting furnaces would have thinned and receded. In this scenario, the collapse wasn't a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, grinding decline, a desperate struggle against an environment that was no longer their ally. Others suggest a different, less dramatic end. Perhaps the Nok didn't vanish at all. Maybe they simply moved, migrated, and merged. Over generations, they could have assimilated into newer, rising ethnic groups like the Yoruba, the Nupe, or the Gwari. In this view, the Nuke people themselves survived, carrying their memories, their bloodlines, and perhaps even some of their traditions, forward. But they left their distinctive sculptures behind as silent monuments to a past identity. The art style vanished, but the people endured, transformed. Yet, even as we build these theories and debate the possibilities, the silence from the Nok themselves remains absolute. There are no written records to decipher, no grand temples or palaces left standing in the open to map. All we have are these clay witnesses, their faces frozen in expressions that seem to bridge the gap between the human and the divine. When you look closely at them, you can almost feel a sense of profound fatigue etched into the clay. It's as if the artists, sensing the end was near, poured their final breath, their final ounce of spirit, into each sculpture. They weren't just creating art. They were creating anchors for their memory, knowing that the world as they knew it was closing in around them. Let's imagine it for a moment. Picture a woman, a master sculptor in her village, in the final days of her culture. The air is thick with dust from the dry fields. The clay under her skilled fingers feels different, perhaps cracking more icily in the arid heat. Around her, many have already stopped their work, resigned to their fate or preparing to leave. But she continues, shaping one last ancestor head. Her child, watching her, might ask, "Mama, why do you still work when the others have stopped?" And she might reply softly, her voice barely a whisper above the wind, "Because someone must remember us." Then, with a heavy heart, she buries the finished head beneath the floor of her hut. A final, desperate act of preservation, sealing a message in a bottle of earth for strangers yet unborn. And we're 2.5 millennia later become those strangers. We are the ones who have uncorked the bottle. We are the inheritors of that silent message. The disappearance of the Nok wasn't just the collapse of a society or the migration of a people. It was a kind of erasure by the earth itself. The rich, red soil of West Africa, which had once nurtured their crops and provided the very material for their art, became their shroud. It covered their villages, their furnaces, and their memories like a slow, inexorable wave, layer upon layer, until all that remained were these fragments of a civilization that was too proud, too vibrant, to ever fully die. There's something so hauntingly poetic about their fate. Here was a culture that learned to craft a form of immortality from the simple clay beneath their feet, only to be immortalized by that same clay in a way they could never have imagined. Their legacy wasn't written in stone or gold, but in the humble, fired earth that both sustained and ultimately consumed them. Their art became their only voice, a chorus of silent faces speaking to us across an ocean of time. Beneath the archaeological fascination with the Noke civilization lies a much deeper, more human question. When a civilization disappears, what truly dies first, the people or their story? It's a question that echoes through the halls of history, from the Mayans to the Indus Valley people. But with the Nok, the clues are buried in the very earth that once sustained them, waiting for us to listen. Perhaps the most poignant answer lies in their burial rituals. Across various excavation sites, archaeologists have discovered a curious pattern. Exquisite terracotta figures, some almost life-sized, were found deliberately broken and carefully buried alongside iron tools, smelting furnaces, hammers, and agricultural implements. This wasn't accidental damage, it was intentional. These figures weren't just household ornaments or grand statues for public display. They were offerings. They were profound acts of remembrance, perhaps performed in times of great fear or uncertainty. Imagine the scene. A community facing an existential threat, perhaps a devastating drought drying up their crops, a relentless epidemic sweeping through their villages, or the slow, creeping pressure from migrating groups. As they felt their world ending, their way of life slipping through their fingers like dry sand. What did they do? They turned to what they held most sacred. They offered their finest art, the very embodiment of their cultural identity and spiritual beliefs, to the ancestors. It was a plea, a desperate prayer etched in clay and fire, asking for survival, for guidance, for a continuation of their lineage. Each shattered piece of terracotta wasn't an act of destruction, but an act of profound sacrifice of their most beautiful creations in the hope that their people might endure. It tells us that for the Nok, art wasn't just for looking at, it was for communicating with the forces that governed their world. At a remarkable site near the village of Taruga, the story gets even more intimate and complex. Here, archaeologists unearthed an incredible mixture of artifacts. They found the remains of sophisticated furnaces, capable of reaching the high temperatures needed for iron smelting. Scattered all around were clay shards from tuyeres, the nozzles that piped air into the fire, and fragments of terracotta sculptures. But mingled with this evidence of industry and art were human bones. Life, work, and death were all found together, baked into a single, inseparable layer by the slow oven of time. This strange, almost poetic mix tells us something fundamental about the Nok worldview. They didn't seem to separate the sacred from the ordinary, the spiritual from the mundane. In our modern lives, we often compartmentalize. We have our workplace, our home, our place of worship. For the Nok, it seems these divisions didn't exist. Every strike of a hammer on hot iron wasn't just labor. It was a rhythm of creation that echoed the gods' work. Every sculpture shaped from wet clay wasn't just an object. It was a vessel for a spirit. Every bead fired in a kiln wasn't just decoration. It was a tiny, solidified prayer. Their entire existence was a ritual. Making a tool to till the earth was as sacred as carving a face to honor an ancestor. Their workshops were their temples, and their labor was their liturgy. So, when we ask what happened to the Nok, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Perhaps their disappearance wasn't a tragedy in the way we typically imagine a cataclysmic end, a final, definitive stop. Maybe it was a transformation. Maybe they didn't die out in the conventional sense. Instead, perhaps they dissolved, like a lump of salt in water, changing form but never truly vanishing. Think of it this way: their advanced ironworking knowledge, a technology they pioneered in the region, didn't just disappear. It likely melted into the cultural veins of new, emerging tribes and kingdoms. Their skills were passed on, their techniques adapted, their legacy forged into the tools and weapons of future generations who may have never known their origin. Their unique artistic style, those haunting, triangular eyes and elaborate hairstyles, didn't just vanish. It became memory. It influenced the art of subsequent cultures, its echoes visible in the later sculptural traditions of Ife and Benin becoming part of a grander artistic conversation across West Africa. Their gods, the spirits they honored with their terracotta effigies, likely didn't die either. They just took on new names, new faces, and were worshipped in new ways by new peoples. The essence of their beliefs persisted, woven into the spiritual fabric of the region. Under the surface of modern Nigeria, in a way, the Nok still breathe. They are present in the rich, red earth of the Jos Plateau, the very same clay they shaped with their hands 2.5 millennia ago. They persist in the crafts of local potters who, without ever knowing the direct lineage, continue a tradition of shaping earth and fire. They are alive in the quiet, unyielding persistence of African creativity, a force that has proven time and again its remarkable ability to adapt, innovate, and refuse extinction. As we bring our exploration to a close, let's try a small thought experiment. Imagine you are walking barefoot across the Joes Plateau at dusk. The heat of the day has subsided, and a gentle wind whispers through the sparse vegetation. The ground beneath your feet feels warm, alive. It's teeming with ghosts, but not the kind that haunt or frighten. These are the kind that hum. They are the collective energy of generations of people who lived, worked, loved, and died right where you stand. It's the hum of 1,000 furnaces glowing in the night. The hum of voices chanting as a sculpture is brought from the kiln. It's the hum of a community bound together by skill, by faith, and by the earth itself. And in the quiet of the evening, that hum seems to form words, a whisper carried on the wind. We were here, we worked this land until the earth itself seemed to bleed iron. We shaped the clay into our own image, and in the memory of this earth, we remain. The Nok people may have vanished from the historical record, their cities turning to dust and their names forgotten. But their silence became one of the continent's oldest and most profound songs. It's a hum beneath the surface of history, low, resonant, and unbroken. It's a testament to the idea that a culture is more than just its people. It's an energy, an idea, a story that, once told, can never be truly erased. To truly understand Noak terracotta, we must first journey into the heart of the material itself. This wasn't just any clay. It was a substance chosen with profound intention. The sculptors were geologists of their time, seeking out a specific kind of red earth, rich in iron, from deep within riverbanks or shallow caves. These were places where the land had been compressed over millennia, holding the memory of ancient rivers and forgotten seasons. They were intimately connected to their environment, watching the weather patterns with a keen eye, knowing precisely when the seasonal rains would bring the perfect moisture content to the soil. They understood the sun not as an enemy, but as a partner, knowing when it had baked the earth just enough to create the ideal malleability for their art. This deep, almost spiritual connection to the land was the very first step in creating a masterpiece. The work, you see, began long before a sculptor's hands ever touched a figure. It started with listening to the earth itself, understanding its rhythms, and respectfully asking for its gifts. The preparation of the clay was a ritual, a testament to patience and dedication. Once harvested, the red earth had to be processed, purified of impurities like roots and stones. Then began the kneading. It was a physically demanding, rhythmic process. The clay was kneaded and kneaded again, a dance of hands and earth, folding and pressing, pushing out air bubbles and aligning the particles within. After this arduous process, the clay wasn't immediately ready. It had to rest, left to mature in a cool, damp place, covered to maintain its moisture. During this time, it was as if the clay was absorbing the whispers of the wind, the memory of the water it once held, and the energy of the hands that worked it. This period of rest was crucial. One misstep, one day of unexpected, scorching sun could ruin an entire batch of clay, rendering it cracked and useless for the delicate work ahead. A potential head, a torso, a limb, all could be lost before the sculpting even began. Yet, the Nok people persisted. This meticulous preparation ensured that when the time came, the clay would be a perfect extension of the artist's will. When the clay was finally deemed ready, the true magic began. The sculptor would take a piece of this living earth and begin to shape it. It was a process imbued with a deep sense of life. They didn't just mold clay. They seemed to breathe life into it, shaping each figure as if it were a living being, imbuing it with their own rhythm, their own heartbeat. Each piece was unique, born from a singular moment of creation. The figures often began as simple, coiled shapes, with the sculptor building up the form layer by layer. a technique that gave the final pieces their characteristic strength and hollow interiors. This wasn't just about creating a likeness, it was about capturing a spirit. In every curve and contour, you can almost feel the presence of the artist, their focus, their reverence for the material and the subject. It was a partnership between human and earth, a dialogue conducted not in words, but in pressure, texture, and form. Every single stroke of the hand, every indentation made with a tool of wood or bone, mattered immensely. The sculptors shaped noses, mouths, and eyes not just as anatomical features, but in ways that echoed their understanding of nature, their reverence for their ancestors, and their connection to the gods. The distinctive triangular or semicircular eyes, for instance, are a hallmark of Nok art, a stylized choice that conveys a powerful, serene, and watchful presence. These faces weren't meant to be photorealistic portraits in the modern sense. Instead, they were symbolic representations, capturing the essence of a person or a spirit rather than just their physical appearance. The details they carved were a rich visual language. They chiseled intricate hairlines and complex coiffures that likely told stories of social status, lineage, and community roles. They inscribed patterns on the skin that whispered of identity, achievements, and spiritual affiliations. These weren't superficial decorations. In a culture without a known written script, these markings were the language of memory. They were a visual text, a library of information etched in clay that miraculously survived the erasure of time and the loss of oral traditions. As the sculptors worked, a delicate balance had to be maintained with the drying process. The clay, now shaped into a human or animal form, began its slow transition from wet to dry. It was a vulnerable stage. The artists had to manage this process carefully, almost as if the clay itself knew it was destined for the transformative power of fire. A piece drying too quickly would crack, its form collapsing. To prevent this, sculptors often left their figures to rest in controlled environments. They might cover them gently with large, waxy palm leaves, which would slow evaporation and allow the moisture to leave the clay body evenly. Other times, they would let them sleep in the deep, cool shade of a giant baobab tree, protected from the direct, harsh rays of the sun. This slow, patient drying was essential. Only once the clay had settled, once it was firm and resilient to a gentle touch, yet still held a whisper of its former forgiveness, would it be ready for the final, dramatic stage of its creation, the kill. The firing process was the moment of ultimate transformation, where earth became stone and ephemeral clay became enduring terracotta. The Nok likely used a method known as open-pit firing. This involved digging a shallow pit, carefully stacking the dried sculptures inside, and covering them with wood, grasses, and other combustible materials. The fire would be lit and had to be managed with incredible skill. The temperature needed to rise gradually to avoid thermal shock, which could cause the pieces to explode. Then, it had to reach a specific, intense heat, likely between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius, and be held there long enough for the clay to undergo its chemical change, a process called vitrification. This was the marriage of patience and fire, a moment of Nok magic. The artists had to understand their fuel, how different woods burned, and how to control the flow of oxygen to the fire. It was a high-stakes culmination of weeks, or even months, of work. Pulling a perfectly fired, intact figure from the cooling ashes must have been a moment of immense triumph and relief. Think about the sheer knowledge required for this. The Nok were masters of pyrotechnology. They had to know how to construct their figures to withstand the intense heat. The hollow nature of the sculptures and the perforations in the eyes, mouth, and ears weren't just stylistic choices. They were brilliant engineering solutions. They allowed hot air and steam to escape from the inside of the sculpture during firing, preventing the pressure buildup that would otherwise shatter the piece. This technical sophistication is astonishing. It tells us that the creation of these terracotta figures wasn't a casual craft. It was a specialized, highly respected profession. It required a deep, cumulative body of knowledge passed down through generations' knowledge of geology, chemistry, engineering, and artistry, all woven together. This wasn't just art, it was science. It was a testament to a complex society that valued both aesthetic beauty and technical innovation. And so, from the red earth of the riverbanks, through the patient hands of the sculptor, and into the transformative heart of the fire, a Nok terracotta was born. Each surviving fragment we hold today is a miracle. It is a survivor of a delicate process, a journey fraught with risk at every stage. From the initial choice of clay to the final cooling in the embers, any number of things could have gone wrong. The fact that so many of these pieces have endured for over 2,500 years is a powerful statement about the skill and intention of their creators. They were not just making objects, they were embedding their world into the very soil they walked on. They were creating messengers sent forth into the future, carrying the stories of their ancestors, the faces of their people, and the spirit of their culture. When we look at a Noked, we are looking at the final, successful outcome of this incredibly long and masterful process. We are witnessing the culmination of Noke magic. Welcome back to our journey into the heart of the ancient Nok civilization. In our last segment, we saw how raw clay was transformed into expressive human figures. But the journey from soft earth to timeless art was far from over. The most perilous, most crucial, and most sacred stage was yet to come: the trial by fire. Today, we delve into the sophisticated art of Nok kill firing, a process that was as much a spiritual ritual as it was a feat of engineering. To the Nok people, kilns were not just simple ovens. They were sacred spaces, wombs of earth and fire, where clay was given its eternal form. Imagine the scene. On a rocky outcrop, under the vast African sky, artisans would construct these kilns with materials sourced directly from their environment. They used stones and clay, carefully shaping the structure to hold and distribute heat with incredible precision. This wasn't guesswork. It was a science perfected over generations. The construction of the kiln itself was an art. The walls had to be thick enough to insulate, the dome shaped to circulate heat evenly, preventing cold spots that could shatter the delicate sculptures within. They learned, through trial and error, exactly how to build these temporary cathedrals of fire, each one a testament to their accumulated knowledge. Once the kiln was built and the sculptures were carefully placed inside, the next phase of this intricate dance began, fueling the fire. This was a process of layering, of understanding the unique properties of different types of wood. They would start with softwoods, which ignite quickly, providing an initial, gentle warmth that would slowly dry out any remaining moisture in the clay. Rushing this stage would be catastrophic, as trapped water turning to steam would cause the figures to explode. It was a slow, patient beginning. As the temperature gradually rose, the sculptors would introduce hardwoods. These burn hotter and longer, sustaining the intense heat needed for the vitrification process, where the clay particles begin to fuse together, turning the fragile material into hard, durable terracotta. This wasn't just about piling on wood. It was about orchestrating a symphony of heat. Controlling the fire was a masterclass in observation and intuition. The sculptors became one with the elements, reading the language of the flames, They knew how to manage the airflow with pinpoint accuracy, opening and closing vents strategically carved into the kill's structure. Opening a vent would introduce more oxygen, making the fire burn hotter and fiercer. Closing it would starve the flames, lowering the temperature and creating a reducing atmosphere inside the kiln, which could alter the final color of the terracotta. Think about the skill this required. There were no thermometers, no digital gauges. The Nok sculptors relied entirely on their senses, honed by years of practice and the wisdom passed down from their ancestors. They would check the temperature by sight and sound, by the very feel of the air around the kiln. They understood the meaning behind the color of the flames. A bright yellow-orange indicating one temperature, a glowing white signaling another. They could hear the way the embers crackled, a subtle shift in the sound telling them the fire needed more fuel or more air. And then there was the smell. The thick, fragrant smoke that curled from the top of the kiln was not just a byproduct. It was a signal. The scent of burning wood, mingling with the distinct aroma of baking clay, created a unique aromatic signature that told the master potter everything they needed to know about the conditions inside. To an outsider, the smoke and roaring fire might have looked like chaos, but to the Nok, it was a perfectly controlled performance, a symphony of heat, wind, and intense anticipation. This fragrant smoke, rising towards the heavens, was also seen as carrying their prayers, asking the spirits to bless the firing and protect the precious art within. The entire process was imbued with a deep spiritual significance. The firing of a single kill could last for days. It was an endurance event, demanding constant vigilance. The sculptors would work in shifts, never leaving the kilt unattended. They would watch over it through the day and into the night, their silhouettes cast against the glowing furnace. This was not just a job. It was a sacred duty, a communal effort to ensure the survival of their culture in ceramic form. Every firing was a risk. Failures were an accepted and integral part of the art. Despite their immense skill, some sculptures would inevitably crack under the thermal stress. Others might warp, their carefully sculpted features twisting in the intense heat. But in the Nok worldview, these weren't seen as disasters. Each mistake was a lesson. Each imperfection was a new piece of knowledge gained. These lessons were not written down in books. They were passed down orally, from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next. You can almost hear the echoes of their teachings across the centuries. Let the fire breathe, do not smother it. Watch the flames, don't try to force them. Listen to the clay. It will tell you when it is ready. This oral tradition was incredibly resilient. It ensured that this vital knowledge survived, embedded not on paper, but in the touch, the memory, and the intuition of each artisan. This is how a culture without a written language preserved one of its most complex technologies. When a firing was successful, the result was nothing short of miraculous. After days of intense heat, the kiln would be allowed to cool. Another slow and carefully controlled process that could take several more days. The anticipation during this cooling period must have been immense. Finally, the kiln would be opened. What emerged was not just hardened clay, it was terracotta that possessed an extraordinary resilience, a material engineered to survive for millennia. These figures, having endured the crucible of fire, were now equipped to withstand the quiet, persistent erosion of time, the pressure of the soil, and the moisture of the earth. When modern archaeologists began unearthing these stunning figures in the 20th century, they were amazed. They found not just beautiful art, but a coded testament to the Nok's profound understanding of materials, science, chemistry, and thermodynamics. The terracotta itself was proof of their genius. The evenness of the firing, the hardness of the material, and its sheer longevity spoke volumes about the people who had created it. These sculptures are a direct link to a sophisticated African society that thrived over 2,000 years ago. They are the voices of the Nok, preserved in fired earth, telling a story of artistry, community, and a deep, symbiotic relationship with the natural world. The fire that gave them their permanence also ensured that their story would not be lost to the ages. The legacy of the Nok is not just in the figures they left behind, but in the incredible process they perfected. It shows us that advanced technology doesn't always look like circuits and screens. Sometimes it looks like a clay kiln on a rocky plateau, with a skilled artisan reading the story told by smoke and flames against a setting sun. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fiery heart of Noek artistry. I hope you found this as fascinating as I did. The hands of the Noke sculptors did more than just shape clay. They were reaching into realms unseen, touching the spirits, the ancestors, and the very forces that gave life to their villages and forests. Every curve, every hollowed eye, every meticulously patterned braid was a deliberate connection or bridge built between the world of the living and the eternal. The spiritual dimension of Noke art is impossible to overstate. For the sculptors, these figures were never simply representations of human beings. They were vessels. Vessels of memory, of protection, and of the divine itself. Imagine the quiet of the dawn, the sky just beginning to blush with color. Before a sculptor would even think of touching the clay, specific rituals had to be observed. Smoke from small, sacred fires would curl into the morning air. Offerings of grain and precious palm oil would be made, and hushed chants would prepare both the artisan and their material for the sacred work that lay ahead. Elders often stood as overseers during these ceremonies. Their presence a solemn reminder to the young sculptors that their hands were not working alone. They were guided by the ancestors, by the spirits of the land, and by the collective weight of generations past. This spiritual preparation was crucial. It ensured that the final figures would carry a power that went far beyond their mere physical form. The Nok held a profound belief that the clay itself was alive, imbued with a potent energy drawn directly from the earth. To shape it without the proper respect was to court misfortune. As they worked, sculptors would often hum or chant, the cadence of their voices matching the steady, rhythmic movements of their hands. These chants were part practical, part mystical. They contained instructions for proper shaping techniques, reminders of ancestral lineage, and prayers for protection throughout the process. In some communities, it was believed that failing to observe these rituals would have tangible consequences. The figures might crack and shatter during the firing process, or worse, they would emerge spiritually empty, useless as guardians or commemoratives. Beyond the rituals, the Nok integrated their religious symbolism and ancestral invocations directly into the sculptural forms. The eyes, for instance, were often exaggerated or deeply set, a powerful symbol of insight into both the material and the spiritual worlds. The hands were carefully positioned, placed in gestures that suggested blessing, protection, or a silent communication with the spirit realm. The torsos of the figures frequently carried intricate incisions or patterns, each one a coded symbol representing family lineage, social status, or a deep, unbreakable connection to the land. Through these deliberate artistic choices, every single figure became a multi-layered narrative. It was a visual poem, a spiritual artifact, and a historical record, all rolled into one magnificent piece of terracotta. But the Nok didn't fear that this sacred knowledge might fade with time. Their robust oral tradition worked in perfect harmony with the clay. ensuring that the stories behind each and every figure were preserved and passed down. Elders would narrate the meaning of the patterns, the significance of the gestures, and the specific lineage represented by each figure. Apprentices listened intently, repeating the stories, memorizing them, and internalizing not just the technical skills of sculpting, but the entire cultural and spiritual context that gave the art its meaning. In this way, the artistry became inseparable from the philosophy. It embedded a holistic understanding of life, death, ancestry, and the vital importance of community. These practices also intersected with what we might now call cosmology. The Nok lived in a world where Islam had not yet spread fully into their region. Yet their rituals, symbols, and oral teachings reveal an incredibly sophisticated integration of animist belief systems. The figures served as intermediaries, go-betweens for humans and the spirits. They were invoked during times of drought, illness, or conflict. Offerings were left before them to secure favorable outcomes. Anthropologists have noted this fascinating duality. These terracotta pieces were both beautiful art and functioning spiritual tools, demonstrating a remarkable fusion of aesthetics, utility, and the sacred. This profound interplay between artistry and spirituality is also evident in their burial practices. Important figures were buried with great care, often accompanied by significant objects or placed within designated ceremonial spaces. This indicates that the community clearly recognized their dual purpose. They were both commemorative portraits and protective guardians in the afterlife. As modern archaeologists unearth these figures after millennia buried in the earth, they are uncovering not just objects, but an entire philosophy. It's a philosophy built on the recognition that human creativity, when combined with disciplined labor and a deep respect for the unseen, has the power to sustain a culture across the vastness of time. Through all of this, the Nok sculptors exemplified a seamless integration of craft, spirituality, and social cohesion. Their art was a language spoken without words, yet it was understood by entire communities. Every kill that was fired, every figure that emerged from the flames, every pattern inscribed in the clay was a note in an unbroken song that linked the past, the present, and the future. And when a young apprentice learned these ways, they became more than just a maker of objects. They became a keeper of memory, a guardian of spiritual balance, and a participant in a sacred dialogue that transcends time itself. In the end, the echoes of the sacred are not faint whispers lost to history. They reside, tangible and powerful, in the gentle curves of each terracotta face, in the expressive tension of each sculpted hand, and in the profound intentionality of every single incision. The Nok sculptors worked not for themselves, but for a continuum of humanity. They were embedding into clay the resilience, the wisdom, and the reverence that has allowed their culture to speak to us so clearly across 2.5 millennia. Welcome back to our journey into the heart of the Nok civilization. In our last segment, we marveled at the artistic genius of the Nok sculptors. But who ensured this legacy would survive? Who guided the hands that shaped the clay and breathed life into these timeless figures? Today, we explore the profound and inseparable connection between art and authority in Nok society. In the world of the Nok, a chief was far more than just a political leader or an overseer of land and people. He was the living custodian of cultural memory, the guardian of the community's soul. The magnificent terracotta masterpieces we admire today weren't created in a vacuum. They were commissioned, protected, and revered under the watchful eyes of these chiefs. A chief's role transcended mere governance. It was his sacred duty to ensure that the ancient practices, the sacred rituals, and the intricate technical knowledge of sculpture were passed down, unbroken, through the generations. For the sculptors, gaining a chief's approval wasn't just about status or earning a commission. It was a profound recognition that their work had meaning, that it was a vital thread woven into the social and spiritual fabric of their community. Without the chief's sanction, a sculpture was just clay. With it, it became an icon. Imagine the dawn breaking over a Noke village. As the first rays of sun touch the earth, the chief begins his daily rounds. He walks with a deliberate, quiet grace among the village workshops, his ceremonial staff held firmly in hand. Inside, apprentices are already at work, kneeling on the cool earth, their hands moving with focused intent over lumps of wet clay. The chief doesn't need to speak loudly to command respect. His very presence is a reminder of the gravity of their task. He observes the precision of their hands, the deep concentration in their gaze. He isn't just checking on progress, he is safeguarding a legacy. He might pause beside a young sculptor, asking questions that go far beyond technique. He would inquire about the lineage of the style being used, the symbolism of a particular marking, and the spiritual intent behind the figure being formed. These weren't idle questions to assert his authority. They were a crucial part of protecting the culture's integrity. Through this careful, almost paternal supervision, chiefs maintained a powerful continuity across decades, even centuries. They ensured that every sculptor, from the master to the newest apprentice, respected the ancestral codes that governed their art. Yet, within these strict boundaries, there was still room for individual creativity to flourish. But any lapse in ritual, an incorrectly patterned face, or a missing symbolic element wasn't just seen as an artistic mistake. It was a grave offense, an act of disrespect not only to the craft, but to the ancestors themselves. The chief was the final arbiter, the one who ensured the spiritual and artistic harmony of every piece. Beyond this daily supervision, the chief held the practical keys to the entire artistic process. He was responsible for the allocation of essential resources. Creating terracotta is a resource-intensive art. It requires vast quantities of carefully prepared clay, sourced from specific, often sacred, locations. It needs an enormous amount of fuel to fire the kilns to the precise temperatures required. And, of course, it demands reliable access to water. In no-wax society, not just anyone could lay claim to these resources. The chief decided who would receive the best materials. This privilege was granted only to the most respected and skilled artisans, a clear mark of both their proven talent and the trust the community placed in them. This system of resource allocation did more than just ensure quality control. It reinforced the social and spiritual hierarchy. It guaranteed that only those artisans deemed worthy, those whose hands were guided by both skill and reverence, could create the objects imbued with the highest spiritual and social authority. Think about it, the chief's sanction was the catalyst that transformed ordinary clay, dug from the earth, into a sacred vessel for memory. These sculptures became repositories of ancestral wisdom, physical manifestations of the community's identity, all because a chief had judged the creator worthy of the task. This wasn't just about managing supplies. It was about curating the spiritual and cultural output of his people. The social function of the chief as a custodian of art extended deep into the realm of ritual. Noke terracotta wasn't just made to be looked at, it was made to be used. These figures were central to the most important ceremonies of life. Initiations that marked the passage from childhood to adulthood, solemn funerals that guided souls to the ancestral realm, and vibrant seasonal rites that celebrated harvests and prayed for fertility. The chief was the grand coordinator of these rituals. It was his responsibility to ensure that the sculptures were not only aesthetically perfect, but also spiritually charged and ready for their sacred purpose. Picture a ceremony under a large, specially erected canopy. The village elders are gathered, their voices rising and falling in a soft, rhythmic chant. Before them, arranged carefully on woven mats, are newly fired terracotta figurines. It is the chief who presides over this scene. He leads the invocations, calling upon the ancestors to bless the figures and imbue them with their power. He directs the offerings of grain, water, or other symbolic items. He preserves the sacred codes of conduct that surround the creation and use of these objects. For the sculptors, this deep involvement of their leader meant that their labor was never performed in isolation. Their work was seen, celebrated, and seamlessly integrated into the living, breathing traditions of their people. It affirmed that their art was not a solitary pursuit, but a communal act of devotion. Perhaps one of the most crucial aspects of this custodianship was the chief's direct oversight of education and the apprenticeship system. The skills required to create Noack terracotta were complex and nuanced. They couldn't be learned from a book. They had to be passed directly from hand to hand, from master to student. Chiefs often took a personal role in organizing this transmission of knowledge. They would identify promising young apprentices and pair them with master sculptors, carefully supervising their progress over many years. This system ensured that the deep knowledge of clay preparation, modeling techniques, intricate firing processes, and the associated ritual knowledge was preserved with absolute fidelity. Across the scattered villages of the Noack heartland, these chiefs acted as the essential bridge connecting the living community to its historical memory. They were the mediators of culture, faith, and technique, ensuring the unbroken flow of knowledge from one generation to the next. As evening descends on the village, the chief's presence takes on a more symbolic quality. The day's work is done. Smoke curls lazily from the cooling kilns, and the silhouettes of apprentices can be seen tidying their workshops before fading into the dusk. The chief might walk the boundaries of the village one last time. This quiet, solitary patrol is a powerful act. It's a silent reminder to all that culture, this precious inheritance, is both fragile and enduring. It is shaped by human hands, it is honored through sacred rituals, and it is protected by rightful authority. The chiefs were the silent guardians of continuity. Their unwavering oversight ensured that the labor of each sculptor was valued, that their art had purpose, and that the sacred flame of their civilization's creativity burned steadily, passed from one generation to the next. It is through this careful, measured, and deeply committed stewardship that the Noack civilization was able to leave a legacy that continues to echo across the centuries. The terracotta figures are not just artifacts, they are testaments to a society where art, authority, and spirit were one. Input analysis, asterisk, 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 asterisk theme, asterisk, asterisk, hello, and welcome back to our journey into the heart of the Noack civilization. In our previous segments, we've marveled at the artistic brilliance of their terracotta sculptures. But who were the powerful figures commissioning these masterpieces? Today, we delve into the intricate world of the patrons who fueled this extraordinary artistic tradition, revealing a society where art, spirituality, and technology were inseparable. The Noack terracotta tradition wasn't born in a vacuum. It was nurtured and directed by the most influential members of society, the iron-smelting chiefs and the sacred cult leaders. These elites were the gatekeepers, controlling access not just to wealth, but to the very materials and rituals that gave life and meaning to the clay. They held the keys to both the material world and the spiritual realm. Imagine a society where iron was more than just a metal. It was a substance of immense power, both practical and deeply symbolic. The production of terracotta was intrinsically linked to iron. The very kilns used to fire the clay, the furnaces that roared with transformative heat, and the ceremonial tools used in rituals often required iron components. And these tools weren't just functional. They were themselves sanctified objects, imbued with spiritual significance. The iron-smelting chiefs, therefore, weren't just industrialists. They were custodians of a dual power, overseeing the creation of both the tools that built their world and the art that defined its soul. At the core of this system were the iron-smelting cults, shrouded in secrecy and ritual. These groups were the guardians of transformative knowledge. Just as a sculptor transformed a lump of ordinary clay into an enduring, expressive figure, the smelter transformed raw ore into gleaming, powerful metal for tools, weapons, and sacred objects. These processes were not merely technical. They were profound mystical events. Picture this: under a star-filled sky, fires are lit, not by convenience, but according to precise celestial observations. The air hums with chants that echo through the generations, invoking the guidance of ancestral spirits. As the furnace glows and the ore begins to yield its treasure, the first blooms of molten iron are not taken for production, but are offered back to the spirits in a gesture of gratitude and respect. The terracotta workshops often operated in close proximity to these sacred furnaces, sharing not just physical space, but a deep well of knowledge, techniques, and even a shared ceremonial calendar. A misaligned firing, an improperly observed ritual, these could spell disaster, rendering both the art and the iron spiritually impotent, useless for social, spiritual, or military purposes. The synergy was absolute. The success of one depended entirely on the sacred integrity of the other. This spiritual dimension was amplified by the sacred ancestor cults, which held immense sway over Noac society. The terracotta figures we so admire were often more than just representations of living people. They were powerful vessels for ancestral spirits themselves. It was the chiefs and the cult leaders who determined which ancestors were to be honored, which rituals were to be performed, and how offerings were to be made and distributed. This gave them profound influence over the artistic process. Sculptors were not free agents expressing a personal vision. They were guided, even directed, by these elites. Every detail, the shape of a face, the intricate patterns incised on the skin, the specific posture of a figure had to be precise. This wasn't artistic censorship. It was a sacred duty to embed theological and genealogical accuracy into each work. A sculpture had a job to do, to serve as a bridge between the living community and the spirits of the dead. Ensuring its accuracy was paramount to maintaining its power and efficacy. The artist was a channel for a collective, sacred memory, shaped and sanctioned by the community's spiritual leaders. Beyond the spiritual realm, these terracotta figures played a crucial role in the tangible worlds of trade and politics. A beautifully crafted sculpture was not just an object of aesthetic admiration. It was a potent tool of diplomacy. Figures were exchanged as high-status diplomatic gifts to cement alliances, given as tokens of allegiance from a vassal village to a more powerful one, or used to seal important agreements and treaties. Imagine two chiefs meeting to negotiate a peace pact, not just exchanging words, but also a terracotta figure representing a shared ancestor, a physical embodiment of their new bond. In this context, cult leaders and iron-smelting chiefs could wield these artworks to project their authority, reinforce social hierarchies, and communicate their spiritual legitimacy to their own people and to their rivals. A chief who could commission a host of powerful ancestral figures was demonstrating not just wealth, but a deep connection to the spirit world, a mandate from the ancestors themselves. Sculptors, while respected as artisans, were therefore deeply enmeshed in this complex web of ritual, economics, and power politics. Their art was not a personal, isolated exercise. It was a vital thread in the social fabric, its creation and distribution carefully monitored and sanctified by their powerful patrons. This intricate relationship between sculptors and their elite patrons created a unique system of apprenticeship built on secrecy and profound respect. A young artist learning the craft was not just taught how to prepare and shape clay, they were initiated into a much deeper world. They learned to navigate and honor complex social hierarchies, to meticulously observe ritual codes, and to internalize a vast body of sacred knowledge. They were being trained to become conduits, channeling both material technique and spiritual philosophy into their work. The ever-watchful eyes of the elders, combined with the mystical authority of the cult leaders, ensured that no detail in a sculpture was ever accidental. Every single element was deliberate. Every incised pattern was intentional. Every gesture, every posture was infused with layers of meaning, understood by all within the culture. This vigilance guaranteed that the art remained potent and true to its purpose. And what's truly remarkable is that even today, centuries after the Nok culture flourished, echoes of this ancient system resonate in communities that remember and honor this legacy. In parts of Nigeria, sacred lineages continue to venerate their ancestors, maintain ancient ritual spaces, and, most importantly, teach younger generations the enduring value of blending craft with faith. The elite patrons of old, the Iron Chiefs and cult leaders, left behind more than just accumulations of wealth or legacies of power. They bequeathed a framework, a sustainable model that allowed art, spirituality, and community to thrive in perfect tandem. It's a testament to cultural endurance, a sophisticated system built over centuries, where every object tells a story not just of its maker, but of its entire society's beliefs and structure. The terracotta figures are the beautiful result, but the system that produced them is the true masterpiece. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Nok patrons. It's a powerful reminder that art is never just about what we see, but about the complex world that brings it into being. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter in our exploration. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Start of narration: the Noack civilization, as a distinct political or social entity, may have faded into the mists of time, but its soul, its very essence, continues to breathe. It survives in the fiery red earth of Nigeria, and most powerfully, in the terracotta sculptures they left behind. These are not merely hardened remnants of clay. They are profound testaments to endurance, to the unwavering fidelity of ritual, and to the deep well of communal memory. For the descendants of those ancient Noack villages, and for the historians and archaeologists who have dedicated their lives to uncovering these secrets, these figures are living legacies, each intricate pattern etched into the surface. Every carefully considered posture and the myriad of expressive faces tell a story that has journeyed across millennia, story of painstaking labor, deep devotion, and a meticulous care that feels both ancient and immediate. These sculptures are vessels of history, carrying the echoes of a society that valued artistry and spirituality in equal measure. They represent more than just aesthetic achievement. They are a direct line to the hands that shaped them, the communities that revered them, and the beliefs that gave them meaning. When we look at a Noked, we're not just seeing a portrait. We're seeing the culmination of a tradition, a snapshot of a worldview, and a symbol of a people's resilience. The legacy isn't something that was lost and found. It's something that was carefully preserved, passed down through generations in a chain of memory and reverence that remains unbroken to this day. And this chain of memory is most vibrant in the oral histories that still circulate in the communities of the Noak Valley. These stories are not footnotes in a history book. They are the living, breathing heart of the Noak legacy. Elders, with voices rich with the wisdom of generations, recount tales passed down to them, tales of master sculptors working through the deep of night, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight as they channeled ancestral whispers into the clay. They speak of apprentices' young hands, remembering the very first day they were allowed to shape the clay, the profound sense of responsibility. They felt the first time they were entrusted with the sacred patterns, the secret language of their people. In these powerful narratives, the terracotta figures are never described as inert objects. They are companions, silent teachers, and mirrors reflecting the complexities of the human spirit. They are characters in the story of the community, bearing witness to its triumphs and its struggles. This is where the true legacy of Noak art resides, not locked away behind glass in a distant museum or confined to the dry pages of academic texts. It lives in the memory of the people. It is reenacted in performance, and it is honored in sacred ritual. The stories give the sculptures a voice, allowing them to continue their dialogue with the present, sharing their ancient wisdom with anyone willing to listen. This profound cultural continuity isn't just a matter of storytelling. It's actively reinforced through vibrant festivals, solemn rituals, and hands-on teaching. Across the region, communities make pilgrimages to the very sites where terracotta was once fired. They gather to honor the memory of the laborers, the silent, anonymous artisans who shaped history with their bare hands. These are not somber occasions, but celebrations of life and legacy. Music fills the air, dancers move to ancient rhythms, and oral recitations bring the past roaring back to life. These practices are a powerful reminder that for the Noak people, art and spirituality were never separate. They were two sides of the same coin, intricately woven together. Through these ceremonies, modern generations aren't just observing the past, they are actively engaging with it. They connect with the very same values that guided their ancestors. Patience, a deep respect for tradition, diligence in their craft, and a profound devotion to the spiritual world. A young apprentice learning to shape clay today is part of a lineage stretching back over 2,000 years. The patterns they learn are more than just decoration, they are a language, a connection to every sculptor who came before them. This living transmission of knowledge ensures that the Noak legacy is not a relic, but a constantly evolving tradition, as dynamic and alive as the people who sustain it. Alongside this vital, community-led preservation, modern scholarship and archaeology have played a crucial role in piecing together the puzzle of the Noak. Painstaking excavations have revealed not just more sculptures, but the context in which they were created. Archaeologists have unearthed ancient kill sites, offering clues about the sophisticated firing techniques the Noak people developed. They've found unfinished sculptures, frozen in time, giving us a fascinating glimpse into the artist's process, the stages of creation from a lump of clay to a finished masterpiece. They've also uncovered what appear to be ceremonial spaces, allowing for a more detailed reconstruction of the social, technical, and spiritual life of the Noak. What makes this modern research so powerful is the collaborative spirit in which it's often conducted. Researchers are increasingly working in tandem with local communities, moving away from a model where knowledge is simply extracted and abstracted for foreign journals. Instead, they are building partnerships, ensuring that discoveries are contextualized and that local wisdom is respected and integrated into the scientific record. This synergy between science and tradition creates a much richer, more complete picture. The sculptures themselves, now better understood, continue to inspire a new generation of contemporary African artists who draw on their powerful forms, their unique textures, and their deep symbolism to explore urgent questions of identity, history, and memory in their own work. But beyond the art, the history, and the archaeology, the spiritual resonance of the Noack civilization remains profoundly unbroken. For the descendants of the Noack, this is not just ancient history. It is their sacred heritage. Certain sites, identified through oral tradition or archaeological discovery, are still considered sacred ground. Here, rituals are observed that echo the practices of their Nok ancestors, a spiritual thread connecting the present directly to the distant past. When terracotta figures are found or displayed in these communities, they are handled with a reverence that goes far beyond their artistic or monetary value. They are not seen merely as beautiful objects, but as powerful conduits of ancestral wisdom, as tools for moral instruction, and as a means of communicating with those who came before. The enduring message is crystal clear. Even as empires rise and fall, as the very earth shifts and changes over millennia, the spirit of the hands that shaped the clay echoes through time. The legacy is a testament to a tripartite system of preservation. It was the sculptors' unwavering commitment to their craft, the chief's custodial responsibility to protect the community's heritage, and the sacred oversight by the cults that ensured the spiritual power of these objects. Together, they preserved a civilization's essence, not just in memory, but in matter, in the enduring, beautiful, and mysterious terracotta that continues to emerge from the Nigerian soil. And so, it is through this intricate and beautiful interplay of craft, faith, and authority that the legacy of the Nok remains vibrantly alive. It is a bridge built of clay and spirit, connecting a deep past to a dynamic present. The work of these ancient artisans does more than just fascinate us. It teaches us. It speaks of a patience that is almost unimaginable in our fast-paced world. It tells of a communal responsibility, a shared understanding that culture is something you nurture and protect together. And it reminds us of the importance of having reverence for the unseen, for the spiritual dimension of life. These are timeless qualities, human values that survive long after empires have faded, and even the hardest pottery eventually returns to dust. The Nok may be gone, but their message, etched in clay, is eternal. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shaped our world. We'll see you next time. When dawn spills over the old Nok lands, the red earth glows as if lit from within. The wind hums softly through the dry grass, whispering stories only the soil remembers. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the rhythm of ancient chisels striking clay, the laughter of apprentices learning their craft, the low chants of elders calling upon fire and ancestors. The Nok civilization may have vanished from the maps of history, but it has not vanished from memory. It lingers like the scent of rain in dust, like hoofprints slowly fading yet never gone. Every sculpture the Noke people made carried a heartbeat. Inside the clay, between the grooves of fingers long since turned to dust, something profoundly human remains, the yearning to last, to be seen, to connect the living with those who came before. The Noack sculptors, through sheer devotion, left us undeniable proof that art is a kind of faith. It's a faith in endurance, in beauty, and in the timeless power of making something with your own hands. Their chiefs and patrons may be gone, their smelters long silent, and their workshops cold, yet the spirit of creation still hums beneath the soil, waiting to be rediscovered. We so often measure civilizations by the size of the kingdoms they built or the scale of the wars they won. We look for grand palaces and imposing fortresses, but the Nok remind us that sometimes true greatness hides in the quiet things in clay kneaded patiently before dawn, in a fire tended with prayer and precision, in the unwavering patience required to craft a beauty that outlives its maker. Theirs was not an empire of conquest, but an empire of care, of community, and of creativity. And that is why, even now, scholars, artists, and dreamers from all over the world keep returning to their story, to listen, to learn, and to remember. Look closely at a knockhead, whether in a museum or a photograph. Study the triangular eyes, the calm, dignified expression, the intricate scarification marks carved with such reverence. When you do this, you're not just looking at a relic. You are looking into the eyes of a people who believed that clay could speak. Their sculptures weren't made to impress strangers centuries later. They were created to commune with the unseen, to hold conversations with the gods, to honor their ancestors, and to instruct the living. In those silent terracotta faces lies a quiet but powerful sermon about dignity, the kind of dignity that requires no empire, no grand monument, only a deep faith in one's craft and community. And when the rains fall, as they have for millennia, washing over the hills and valleys where the Nok once thrived, the clay absorbs the water like a memory awakening. The past softens, it reshapes, it re-emerges just as these stories do, retold under the vast canopy of the baobab tree, whispered into the African night, remembered through the enduring power of art, and carried forward by those who refuse to let such a profound legacy be forgotten. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, I want you to remember this. The hoofprints may fade, the workshops may crumble to dust, but the spirit of the Nok remains. It lives on in every hand that shapes, every fire that burns, and every artist who dares to create something with reverence and purpose. The Nok people remind us that creation itself is a profound act of remembrance. It is how we humans whisper to eternity, across the vastness of time, we were here. We mattered. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you were moved by the story of the Nok, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories. Your support helps us continue to share these important histories with the world. Until next time, stay curious. You are under baobab skies.